Good morning, friends. Today I'm going to talk to you about the latest visit by the Chinese president to America. I mean, it is not such a simple visit कि अब वो बाइजिंग से उठे जहाज में बैठे and he went to San Francisco. No. There are deeper currents involved in all this and it shows that China is really under pressure. And second चीज जो बड़ी important आ रही है is that Biden himself थोड़े lost हैं. He doesn't know what's happening. Otherwise, Biden has not met Putin even once, though the war has continued for 2 years. And on the contrary, he insisted and somehow got together a arrest warrant issued against Vladimir Putin from the International Court. I mean, it's a very unheard of thing. And I'm told that arrest warrant issued now against Putin's ally, that is President Assad of Syria, by the French. Well, I have no comment to make on all this because these are all political gimmicks. But the very fact that he has not bothered, Joe Biden I'm talking of, to meet the Russian president to look for a solution to the Ukraine war, and at the same time has gone and met the Chinese president and given him a reasonably warm welcome in San Francisco. What does it show? Gentlemen, I have been studying politics for a long time. There are two things which come out. One is that America is slipping. Russia is not an economic power, so they are not really bothered about Russia. Russia के बारे में उनको कोई botheration नहीं है, because Russia economic power नहीं है, and they have in any case taken Russia out of the SWIFT system, international banking system. They put so many sanctions on Russia, and declared Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. मतलब अपने सारे जहाज से विद रशिया के साथ वो जला दिए. They burnt them. And as far as China is concerned, the Americans are really in a fix, because what the Chinese have done now is they had certain American securities with them, certain American debt worth $62 billion. They sold it in the market, and that is affecting America very much. And America actually is relying on trade with China to survive. Now, this is a very difficult statement to make. Perfect बात तो ये है कि they have a economy trade of almost $650 billion and about $450 billion is weighted in favor of China. हर एक चीज आप देखिए जो अमेरिका में इस वक्त मिल रही है is all made in China. पर कहाँ अमेरिका स्कोर कर रहा है? That is only in the military field, because इनकी military technology is of very high standard, making them the world's #1 superpower. But a superpower without economic power cannot sustain itself long. How long do you think the Americans can continue in this way, building up a massive military arsenal and economically becoming hollow, that their crown will not be taken from them? See, after 1945, अमेरिका में ऐसे प्रेसिडेंट आए जिनकी कोई होराइजन नहीं थी, कोई फोरसाइट नहीं थी. आइजनहावर पहले प्रेसिडेंट बने, मैं थोड़ी सी बता देता हूँ उनके बारे में. वो आर्मी जनरल थे, वहाँ भी वो बहुत ही मीडियोकर परफॉर्मेंस उन्होंने किया. एंड फील्ड मार्शल मॉन्टगोमरी ने अपनी बायोग्राफी में लिखा भी है कि he was just an average general and he was made the chief of the allied armies. He became president. तो उससे तो कोई एक्सपेक्टेशन थी नहीं. Then came John Kennedy, बहुत डायनेमिक आदमी थे. He was a wonderful man, but he got shot dead. You know that अमेरिका में ये कल्चर है, गन कल्चर. And in that gun culture, he was shot dead while he had gone on a visit to Dallas. Then came Lyndon Johnson. ये एक ऐसे आदमी थे जिनकी कोई horizon ही नहीं थी. He had no horizon at all. He didn't know a thing of what's happening in global politics. All the time he had been vice president. He'd been thrust as the president. He was the man who escalated the conflict in Vietnam. और उन्होंने एक false incident create कर दिया, which is known as the Tonkin Gulf incident, which never took place, so that he could have an excuse to bomb North Vietnam. पर ये सब ठीक होता अगर उनको victory मिल जाती. But despite the heavy bombing over North Vietnam, the Americans just but zero, they lost the war. And उससे बड़ी बात ये है कि जॉनसन जो था was under the thumb of the American socio-military complex. The big industrialists of America were looking for a market for their goods, and they felt that China is the right place. With a massive population of 1 billion, they thought, well, here is a God-sent opportunity, let's expand there. And at that time, if I remember correctly, what I've been reading, in 1964, China went nuclear. Now the Americans are making such hue and cry about a small country like Korea becoming nuclear. Donald Trump ले लीजिए या उससे पहले Bill Clinton, all these people were shouting from the rooftops that North Korea must be stopped from becoming a nuclear power. Yet at that critical moment in 64, the real threat to America was from China, and they did nothing about it. I was reading somewhere that some bombers were kept ready in order to go and bomb the American sites, but Johnson put a stop to it. Because he thought, and it a very erroneous way of thinking, that China will come on our side, China will be on the American side, and Russia will be sidelined, and Chinese market will open up. We will be with China and rule the world. China will be our subservient yes man. But they had not understood the Chinese philosophy. China has got a civilization of 4,000 years. और अमेरिका तो 1776 में ही फॉर्म हुआ था. So Joe Biden, the American president at that time, just could not anticipate what's going to happen. And Lyndon Johnson was a mediocre man. And he did not stop the Chinese nuclear program or bomb it to submission. And at the same time, he started transferring a lot of technology to China. He was very happy when there were some border clashes between China and Russia in 69-71. And many Chinese soldiers were shot dead by the Russians. And these border problems continued, and China and Russia became enemies at that time. And John and the American think tank were very happy that this is a wonderful thing. And Richard Nixon, the next man who came as president, was another very dubious person. His conduct must be investigated as to what exactly transpired and how he ditched Taiwan. See, ever since 1945, the Americans had been always supporting Taiwan as the real China, that is the Republic of China, ROK. And they said this is the country that will represent China in the United Nations and other places. Unfortunately, Richard Nixon and his sidekick, Henry Kissinger, thought otherwise. They thought, well, we should put our eggs in the Chinese basket. And Chiang Kai-shek was thrown into the Pacific Ocean. The man who had been there alive for half a century. And then they recognized the one China principle. They said, well, China will always be one country, and we will ensure that Taiwan doesn't become independent. This was assurance given. At the same time, they extracted a promise that China will try and not to invade Taiwan. Gentlemen, much water has flown down in that time, and everything was going honky-dory for the Americans because some of the big American corporations, like Apple and others, they all went into China in a big way. They brought in technology, and the Americans could never think that China will catch up anywhere close to them. Because China was in the 70s an agrarian country, dependent on agriculture. China में कुछ नहीं बनता था, nothing. And yet, the Americans thought by giving aid to them, by setting up our factory, and they were of course going to make the profits, reap the profits as we say. But they also thought that China will be with us and we will have a world order based on America being number one. And they were very happy that China and Russia have broken apart. They've been having a military battle also at places. And they said China on one side will rule the world. अंग्रेजी में एक कहावत है, if wishes were horses, then wagons will ride. पर यही बात हुई. The Americans' wishes were only wishes and nothing was going to happen out of it. Because Chinese have got a very ingenious mind. They did something called reverse engineering. And most of the products which were being made in China by the Americans were copied by the Chinese. And it is on record that within 1970 to within a period of 2 decades, China rose up like the phoenix. Now you all know what is a phoenix. Phoenix is the bird, the mythical bird which rose up from its own ashes. China, which had been ravaged and destroyed by the Japanese, including the Civil War which had lasted half a century, suddenly began to become belligerent because they started having military power. And their sight was very clear that they would restore China to the old glory of the Middle Kingdom. That is the time when China was the center of the world. And they went about it very assiduously. And they were held in a big way by the Indian leadership led by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was, in any case, one can't use a better word for him. Or one can just say that he was a foolish man. That's all. I mean, I would like to use a stronger word. But he had no comprehension of what is power politics, what is military power, what is geopolitics. He knew nothing. And he was thinking that what is important is this demise of imperialism. Now, imperialism to mar gayi thi, khatam ho gayi thi. Imperialism was nowhere. And so he thought China and India will be friends, and he started that famous Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai program. At the same time, he made a agreement with China called the Panchsheel, the 5 principles of coexistence. See, all Chinese, he did not understand. The Chinese only do things on paper, and that's about it. After that, they tear the paper and throw it away. But China was biding its time, and what they did was they occupied the entire Tibet, which Nehru gave them as a gift on a platter. He didn't intervene, do anything, gave away all the rights which the British had built so assiduously in Tibet. He gave them away. And not only that, he gave away over 30 or 40,000 square miles of Indian territory in Aksai Chin. He didn't know about it. So China's rise was facilitated by 2 people. That is, one is the Americans, who gave them technology, industry, and then second by Pandit Nehru, who let the Indian army go to seed. And net result was the Indian army was badly defeated in the 1962 war with China. वो तो होना ही था. It's worth reading some very interesting book, Brigadier John Dalby की किताब है Himalayan Plunder, which you can read it. And you should also read India-China War by Maxwell. Anyway, gentlemen, मैं जो point कह रहा हूँ कि China could not have risen up but for these sort of people who were there in charge. Richard Nixon जो थे, he was again in a dream world. It's a good thing that he was caught up in the Watergate scandal and had to resign. Otherwise, he would have been impeached and thrown out. But he had done the damage. He threw in the towel as far as the Vietnam War is concerned. And I've studied the Vietnam War. Probably the Americans could have won it, but they didn't have any single-minded devotion or political aim. And they never attacked the supply lines which were being used by the North Vietnamese from China to North Vietnam and then South Vietnam. Anyway, that war is over, gone. The Americans lost, they went, but they continued their friendship with China. And they thought that China will now be with us. But the Chinese and the Russians had a rapprochement. They settled the border dispute. And then something happened which is very drastic, with the Americans were jumping with glee. And that was the breakup of the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union was a very monolith force, which was led by very strong people, earlier by Lenin and then later by Stalin. But after the death of Stalin, there was nobody strong enough who could hold the Soviet Union together. For some time, there was a good man who led, there was Nikita Khrushchev. But then they had Brezhnev, who didn't know what was happening. And then Shevchenko, he died, and all that thing continued, and the Russian state broke up into 18 countries. It was a big American victory. And at that time, I was a young man, and I remember reading when Mrs. Margaret Thatcher had said, communism is finished forever. She was right. Communism is an anathema, and it not only broke the Tsarist Empire, it broke the Russian Empire, and I don't know what communism achieved. Anyway, so now the situations continued. Russia and China began to have a rapprochement, And the Americans continued their gunboat diplomacy all over. Everywhere they were in power, they got Che Guevara shot dead. They got the Shah of Iran put into power in Iran. In 1954, a coup by the CIA. They got the president of Allende shot dead. I mean, just name it. They tried to kill even Castro and launch an invasion, but Castro survived. And then finally, in the famous 62 crisis, when Khrushchev was the first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, there was a famous Cuban Missile Crisis, and in which Kennedy gave the assurance that, well, we will not destabilize Castro, but you take away your missiles. And this was a quid pro quo. They were agreed, and they also, Americans agreed to withdraw their missiles from Turkey. So that was the end of the story. And America yet didn't learn its lessons. They should have learned that things are not static. Everything in the world is dynamic. And their concept of China was totally flawed. Well, gentlemen, China now began to expand. And in one generation, they did what people do in 4 generations. That's a credit to the Chinese ingenuity. And it's a sad commentary that India, which was much ahead of China, is now 1/6 as far as economy is concerned of China. The per capita income is 1/5 of China. It's a very sad thing. Chinese have done away with poverty. India is still having 30 to 40% people still living in poverty. And yet there is no realization in India that we are the laggards and we have to catch up with China. We still get involved in all sorts of absurd things like the caste system and all that. And I'll just by passing say that any country which doesn't have meritocracy in selection of jobs, scientists and other things, and makes the selection on the basis of caste cannot ever become a world power. Mark my word, gentlemen. It's very easy to talk and say India Visham Guru, this thing and all that, but ultimately you know where the shoe pinches. America now got involved in the Vietnam War, and after that they got involved in the Afghanistan War. That was another blunder. I'm not going to talk about the Afghanistan War, and then I'll talk more about the America's relationship with Russia. Russia, the Americans always distrusted. They never liked Russia. And even now, they had a devious plan to break Russia into a few more countries, finish Russia once for all. And that is how the genesis of the Ukraine conflict came up. But at that time, the Americans didn't realize that, well, things are changing. I mean, it's not a static world. And Russia and China, which were enemies, became friends. They became very close friends. And the Chinese realized that Americans are not going to give up Formosa. And they are not going to accept China's claims in the South China Sea. Though earlier, I can tell you, Bill Clinton has given carte blanche to the Chinese to do anything they want in the South China Sea. And that is a fact. And I remember reading President Duterte's statement that it is America which facilitated the rise of China in the Pacific Ocean and their claim over the South China Sea. Because if they were serious at that time, as per President Duterte, they could have sent 5 aircraft carriers paid to the Chinese effort. They didn't do that. And they thought that they'll be friends with China. Now this is fallacious thinking which they always had as far as China is concerned. And net result is, the Americans began to pay a dear price. They began to lose influence all over the world. China caught up with America, is now the second biggest economic power. But China is in problems also. And that is the reason that President Xi came all the way to San Francisco to meet Joe Biden. Now, one thing is very clear, that the Chinese economy is floundering. See, when you spend more than you earn, then what is the result? Inflation, recession. And that is what is happening. China has pumped billions of dollars into their Belt and Road scheme, but that hasn't paid any dividends. Countries like Pakistan have become bankrupt. There's been no progress. And then the Chinese have got a bad name by giving loans in such a manner that the countries become bankrupt. An example is Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is now a stooge of the Chinese, and they have parted away significant portions of their territory to China for 99 years. There's nothing. Same thing with Pakistan. So, gentlemen, China is on the ascendant, but ascendant means they are still in trouble. They're looking for a via media to come out. And the Chinese are very clever and they think they're going to rule the Americans again. That was the background of this meeting in San Francisco. Just remember that President Xi has not been outside China for many months. He doesn't go anywhere. I think he just made a visit to Moscow, and that's about all. He didn't even come for so many meetings. He did come for the meeting in South Africa, but he didn't come to India. So that is the position, gentlemen. Chinese president made a visit there and he received a welcome from Joe Biden. Now, one couldn't understand what Biden's motives in meeting President Xi. Now, basically, the Americans have realized that as far as the economic power is concerned, they are going down. There's a recession on. You have the military power, but military power alone will not be enough. So they need somebody who should be their accomplice. And even now, I think the Americans have a thinking that China is going to be their accomplice in dominating the world, and in which China will accept the suzerainty of of America, and will play second fiddle. But again, it's a very fallacious thinking. The Chinese have been making statements and friendly noises by saying that we don't want a confrontation with America, don't arm Taiwan, that's all, and we don't want a clash with China, we want to progress, we want to live together. It's all hollow talk. I don't know how the Americans get taken away by such talk. And in real terms, China is opposing America at every stage. Even now, in the famous battles which are going on in the Gaza Strip, all the tunnels and the hidden arsenals are all constructed by the Chinese. And I had some reports somewhere that in some of the tunnels, some Chinese technicians have been caught also by the Israelis. And yet, the Americans are going and talking to the Chinese. And China has done something more. What they've done is, they have taken in the new maps published the delineation of Israel. There is no Israel on the maps, only the places are marked. These are old ploys of the Chinese. And I thought the Americans would be wary of it, but they are not. They don't seem to be. And I'm told there's a lot of pressure on Joe Biden from the American top industrialists to open up to China again. Now just imagine, gentlemen, the trade in China is rated in favor by about $400 billion. There'll be much more. I mean, this is on paper. Maybe it's a lot more. And China, which was an agrarian colony, is now the biggest manufacturer of cars in the world. America is number 2. Everywhere, America is going down. So the Americans have to realize that once you reach the top, the apex, you start slipping. And they are slipping now. And unfortunately, as I told you, after 45, they never had a resilient, energetic president, a one who could think ahead. They had Bill Clinton. I thought he was more interested in having love affairs in the Oval Office with Monica Lewinsky. Then you have George Bush. He was the most, what can I say, a man who's doomed America by starting a war in Iraq, got Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi hanged for nothing, and ultimately he was the man who created Islamic terrorism with the advent of the ISI and the Al-Qaeda. Bear in mind, gentlemen, that Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi were against Islamic extremism and hanged scores of them. But Bush had some other ideas, and as a result he had the war and got Saddam executed. But the situation has changed. It's a Shia country, majority Shia, 60 to 70% Shia. And now the Americans, I don't think, are very comfortable in Iraq. And the Iraqi parliament has passed a resolution already that they don't want the American troops there. Iran is now the sworn enemy of America, and at the same time, it is strongly allied with Russia and China. And by starting this war in Ukraine, the Americans foolishly drove the Russians into the arms of the Chinese. I can't deny that. And now China is supporting Russia, and the Americans have not been able to win in Ukraine. And even I have a feeling they will not be able to win even in Gaza. Because here again they are playing a double game, They're saying something else, doing something else. They're supporting that a ceasefire from the Israeli side so that supplies and other things can go to the Gaza Strip. At the same time, their special forces are fighting along with the Israelis, and China is feeling it's being left out. Well, gentlemen, this meeting there is a matter of alarm because probably there could be a secret understanding in the sense that the Chinese have made it plain they don't want to confront America, fight America. But this is just a ruse, gentlemen, a smoke screen. And at the back of their mind, the Chinese with 4,000 years of history would be going about assiduously how they can usurp the Americans. And if America has a detente with China, and once again the same industrialists start going back to China and putting their money in to make some small profits here and there, America would have cooked its goose. I think it's already cooking its goose because now the Americans can see it very unsure what to do, whether it's Ukraine or even in the battle against Hamas. They're very unsure. And they're more unsure when dealing with China because they don't have a comparable power who can match China. Americans don't have the manpower to fight the Chinese. And they're thinking that India would help them. Well, I don't know whether India will do it or no, but Narendra Modi is a shrewd man, he's a great leader, and I hope if he's wise enough, he won't put his eggs in the American basket, because America's got the reputation of just throwing those eggs away and finally saying bye-bye friend, like they did to Chiang Kai-shek, like they did to all the other people whom they supported. And India could be left in the lurch to face China alone. And of course, much of the blame goes to India because India had the power and they should have built up power equivalent to China. They didn't do it. So if somebody's got to blame, it's the Indians themselves, the Indian leadership. And that goes right from the time from Nehru down to Shastri or Indira Gandhi, you name them, So gentlemen, I'm just giving you a picture. All that has happened in San Francisco is basically a ruse. It's a cover-up for China's real intentions. And I don't think the Americans really understood anything. I couldn't understand the reason why Joe Biden should first of all meet this man. And in the meetings, I think Biden came out as someone who lacked dynamism. He was looking aged. He's only 82. I don't think that's a very big age, but he's looking 92. And he didn't seem to be in fully control of his senses or maybe his intellect. I don't know. I mean, he didn't look normal to me. While Z had come with a pre-planned agenda. No, it's a surprise, but he came to meet President Biden. And obviously he had got some insurances from Biden. And trade may again flew up between them. And America could survive. But that's about all I can say. It can only survive. Because if you've got to be the world power, you've got to assert your military might. It doesn't mean that you're going to use nuclear power or something. It doesn't mean that. It means that you have to make the world understand that America cannot be trifled with. But that's not what's happening. There have been more than 50 attacks on American assets and bases in the Middle East after America declared its support for Israel. And America also is not really on the Indian side. I've yet to see America support India and Kashmir. then no statement, nothing on supporting India and Kashmir. And Pakistan still features in the American plans, though Pakistan has put all its eggs in the Chinese basket. So, gentlemen, the situation is very dicey as far as India is concerned. India's got to be very careful. The Americans are cock a hoop. They're feeling that way, but nothing to feel cock a hoop about because it's the Chinese who will play the cards. And I think they hold all the aces. It's a sad occurrence indeed. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the 2024 election. And if that happens and Donald Trump can come back, maybe America could salvage the disaster which has been let loose by Joe Biden. India must also be on the guard because China, if it placates a match, America could look for a battle with India. That's a real likelihood. I will close now, gentlemen. I hope you like my video. Share it with your friends. Come back for more. At the same time, I will say, Jai Hind. And look after yourself. Take care and God bless.